It was supposed to be a celebration, but by nightfall, I was in a hospital bed, bleeding, heartbroken, and called my husband a disgrace. Was I wrong? For 7 years he was my rock, but on the day I lost our baby, something inside him snapped. What happened next changed everything, and left me questioning the man I thought I knew. It began as a day like any other, filled with the mundane routines that define our lives. I woke up early, prepared breakfast for our son, and sent him off to school, my husband, always meticulous, left for work with a kiss on my forehead and a promise to celebrate his birthday, that evening. There was a sense of normalcy, a comforting rhythm that I had come to cherish, but life has a way of blindsiding you when you least expect it. Around midday, I felt a sharp pain in my abdomen. At first, I dismissed it as indigestion, or perhaps stress, but as the pain intensified, and I noticed the bleeding, a cold dread settled over me. I was alone, terrified, and unsure of what was happening. I managed to call my husband, my voice trembling as I relayed the symptoms. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sigh. He said he would leave work and meet me at the hospital. I could sense his frustration, but I attributed it to the stress he had been under lately. At the hospital, the confirmation came swiftly. I had miscarried. The words felt surreal, echoing in my mind as I tried to process the loss. My husband sat beside me, silent and distant. I reached out for comfort, but he recoiled, his face a mask of annoyance rather than empathy later. As we sat in the car, the weight of the day's events pressing down on us, he turned to me and said, "You couldn't have waited another day. You ruined my birthday." The words cut deeper than any physical pain I had experienced. In that moment, I saw a side of him I had never seen before. A coldness, a selfishness that was utterly foreign. I stared at him, disbelief and hurt swirling within me. "You're a disgrace," I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Self-publishing school, The New Yorker. That night I lay awake, the events replaying in my mind. I questioned everything, our marriage, his character, and my own judgment. Was I wrong to call him a disgrace? Had I overreacted in a moment of grief? But deep down, I knew that his reaction was not just a lapse in judgment. It was a revelation. In the days that followed, the distance between us grew. He avoided conversations, buried himself in work, and dismissed any attempts I made to address what had happened. I felt isolated, mourning not just the loss of our child, but the loss of the man I thought I knew. I confided in my mother, her voice a soothing balm. As I poured out my heart, she listened patiently, offering words of comfort and wisdom. "Sometimes tragedy reveals the true nature of those around us," she said gently. Her words resonated, planting a seed of clarity in my mind. I realized that I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. This wasn't just about a single insensitive comment. It was about a pattern of behavior that I had overlooked or excused. The incident with the chair, his increasing irritability, the emotional distance all pointed to a deeper issue. I began to consider the future not just for myself, but for our son. What kind of environment was I subjecting him to? What lessons was he learning about relationships, empathy, and respect? These questions haunted me, compelling me to take action. With a heavy heart, I made the decision to leave. I packed our belongings, careful not to alert my husband, and sought refuge with my family, in another state. The journey was fraught with fear and uncertainty, but I knew it was the right choice. When I informed my husband of our departure, his reaction was explosive. He accused me of betrayal, threatened to take our son away, and even hinted at harming himself. His volatility confirmed my fears, reinforcing the necessity of my decision. Now, in the safety of my family's home, I am beginning the process of healing physically. I am recovering, and emotionally, I am finding strength in the support of loved ones. The road ahead is uncertain, but I am resolute in my commitment to rebuild our lives. This experience has taught me the importance of recognizing red flags, trusting my instincts, and prioritizing the well-being of myself and my child. While the pain of loss lingers, I am hopeful for a future defined by peace, respect, and genuine love. I didn't expect him to fall apart. After I left with our son, part of me braced for silence, a cold, bitter distance. But what came instead was chaos, desperation, rage. Within hours of our departure, my phone was flooded with texts and voicemails. They started with pleas. Come home. We can fix this. I'll change. Then came the blame. You're overreacting. You're ruining our family. This is your fault. I didn't answer. I had spent too many years cushioning his emotions, absorbing his stress, rationalizing his outbursts. I'd told myself it was the pressure at work, that he didn't mean to lash out, that his silence was how he coped. But this time, I couldn't protect him from his own reflection, and I wouldn't let him distort mine. The emotional aftermath was brutal, not just because I was processing the trauma of the miscarriage or mourning a marriage that I now realized had been quietly eroding, but because of the guilt. Guilt for taking my child away from his father. Guilt for saying the word disgrace. Guilt for wondering if I had stayed too long, or worse, if I had left too late. But every time I questioned myself, I remembered his face in the hospital. Not grief-stricken, not confused or scared, just annoyed. Like my pain was an inconvenience to him. My therapist helped me unpack that moment people show you. Who they are when they have nothing left to lose, she said, when stress peels back the layers. What's underneath is the truth. That truth haunted me. For weeks, I couldn't sleep without replaying that drive home from the hospital, how he clenched the steering wheel, how I sat in silence, bleeding and trying not to cry too loudly, how he said, "You couldn't have waited," like I had chosen the timing, like losing a baby was something I could control. Even now, the absurdity of it stings. But in that absurdity, I found clarity. I started making a list, something my therapist suggested. It was titled The Things I Had to Excuse. And once I started, I couldn't stop. The chair he jumped on to prove a point, the times he slammed doors during arguments to get my attention, the subtle digs about my cooking, my parenting, my appearance, the way he made me feel like I was overdramatic. Whenever I cried, the constant tension I felt walking on eggshells when he had a bad day. It wasn't just one moment. It was the pattern, and yet part of me missed him, the version of him who made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs on Sunday mornings, the man who used to dance with our son in the kitchen after bath time. That man did exist, just not always, and not when I needed him most. Grief makes you desperate to cling to the good, but healing requires you to remember the whole truth. One afternoon, about a month after we left, my husband sent me a long email. It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was a manifesto of his pain. How I'd embarrassed him. How he was hurting. How I had abandoned him when he needed me. That word stuck with me. Abandoned. He never once called it what it was. I left. I protected myself and our child. I escaped a situation that had quietly become emotionally abusive. But he couldn't, or wouldn't, see that. That's when I knew the marriage was over. Not because of the miscarriage. Not because of the birthday comment. But because, even after all of it, he still centered himself in the story. There was no acknowledgement of my pain, no ownership of his behavior, no space for my healing. And so, I stopped waiting for closure from him. I started building it myself. I went back to journaling. I reconnected with old friends I had slowly drifted from over the years. I spent mornings walking by the lake with my son, letting him ask questions about everything from bugs to outer space. I cried when I needed to, laughed when I could. I was slowly, quietly becoming myself again. And then one night my son asked, "When are we going home?" The question shattered me. I knelt beside him and said, "We are home, sweetie. Wherever we're safe and happy, that's our home now." He nodded, not fully understanding, but he hugged me tighter that night. Kids know more than we think. In therapy, I learned a word I hadn't used before. Emotional safety. I always thought safety meant protection from physical harm, but emotional safety is just as vital. It means being able to express fear, sadness, or vulnerability without being punished or mocked. I realized I had never had that. I always told myself I was strong enough to take it, that if I just stayed calm, if I just understood him better, if I just loved him enough, things would go back to normal. But that's not strength. That's survival. True strength, I now understand, is leaving when it hurts to stay. It's choosing peace over familiarity. It's refusing to teach your child that love must come at the cost of dignity. I still think about the baby I lost. Sometimes I wonder who they might have been, whether they would have had my curiosity or his laughter, whether they would have had the resilience I had to learn the hard way. But I believe that loss gave me a gift. I didn't expect perspective. The courage to look at my life and say, this isn't right. This isn't safe. I don't regret leaving anymore. I regret not leaving sooner. Healing doesn't announce itself. There's no grand moment where the pain packs its bags and leaves. No applause, no finish line. It just starts to fade slowly. In quiet places, like in the soft laughter of your child, or the calm after a night of dreamless sleep. That's how it began for me. In the beginning, I was waiting for something dramatic to change, like closure from my husband, or a wave of relief that would wash away the grief, but healing isn't loud. It's subtle, almost sneaky. It lives in the little choices you make each day, to choose yourself. I started small. I made coffee, the way I like it, strong, with cinnamon. I bought a new pair of walking shoes. I signed up for a pottery class at a local center, even though I was terrible at it. I stopped trying to explain my pain to people who didn't want to understand. And for the first time in a long time, I spoke gently to myself. It felt strange at first, like learning a new language. But slowly, I began to feel human again. One afternoon, I took my son to the park. He was laughing, chasing pigeons, his hair wild from the wind. A woman sat beside me on the bench and said, "He has your spirit," I smiled, but part of me wanted to cry. Not because I was amazed, but because, for once someone saw me in something joyful, not in grief, not in strength, just joy. That moment stayed with me. In therapy, we started talking about rebuilding identity. Who am I now that I'm not his wife? What do I want, not just for my son, but for myself? It's a question a lot of women forget to ask. Especially after trauma, we get so to being caretakers, peacemakers, protectors. We forget we're allowed to be whole people too. I made a list of things I used to love before I lost myself. Reading poetry out loud, just for the rhythm. Driving at night with the windows down and no destination. Painting badly, just to see colors mix. Writing letters I'd never send. And one by one, I started saying them again. Each act felt like reclaiming a part of me that had been locked away. And with every page, every brushstroke, every walk alone, I remembered that I am more than what I've lost. But healing isn't linear. Some nights the grief still visits, quietly, like a ghost at the edge of the bed. I'll see a baby in a stroller and wonder. Or I'll hear a love song that reminds me of better times. And in those moments, I allow myself to feel it. Grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to live beside. And just because you forgive someone doesn't mean you have to let them back into your life. That was the hardest lesson of all. My husband reached out a few weeks later, more composed, more careful with his words. He said he was seeing a new therapist, that he was sorry, that he missed our son, that he wanted to be better. And for a brief moment, I considered it. I remembered our early days, the laughter, the promise, the way he used to hold our child, like the world depended on it. But then I remembered the silence in the hospital, the accusation, the fear in my child's eyes when he yelled that night we left. I remembered all the times I felt small just to keep the peace, and I realized I could forgive him. From afar, forgiveness isn't about giving someone else a second chance. It's about giving yourself permission to stop carrying their pain. So, I told him, "You can be a father without being my husband, but I'm not coming back." He didn't respond for days. When he did, it was short. I understand. I don't know if he truly does, but I do. I understand now what love is supposed to feel like. Safe, steady, mutual. I understand that being strong doesn't mean staying silent, that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's survival, and that healing isn't about forgetting the past, but learning from it. One evening, I watched the sunset with my son. He leaned on my shoulder and said, "Mom, I like it here. It feels calm." And it was. No tension. No walking on eggshells, is just peace. In that moment, I realized I didn't just survive. I grew. I grew into a woman who knows her worth, who speaks up, who chooses joy, not out of denial, but out of defiance, who no longer asks, "Am I wrong for hurting?" but instead says I deserve to heal. So no, I don't regret calling him a disgrace, because in that moment, I finally stood up for the version of me I'd spent years silencing. And now, I'm speaking louder than ever. Just when life began to feel steady, he came back. Not with flowers, not with closure, but with papers. A custody petition. I found it in the mailbox on a Friday afternoon, tucked between a water bill and a grocery flyer. I stood on the porch, staring at the envelope like it was ticking. And in many ways it was. Inside was legal jargon, but the meaning was clear. He wanted joint custody of our son. It felt like a betrayal. Not because he wanted to be a father, but because of how he was doing it. Through the courts, without warning. After months of silence, he didn't call to talk, didn't ask how our son was doing, didn't visit. Just filed. I had to sit down to breathe. My mom watched me from the kitchen window, her smile fading as she stepped outside. I handed her the envelope, with shaking hands. "He's trying to get him back," I whispered. She read it quickly, her face going from confusion to concern. "We need a lawyer," she said flatly, "and just Like that, the peace I had built began to splinter. The following weeks were a blur of legal consults, document-gathering therapy appointments, and quiet panic attacks in the laundry room. I felt like I was back in survival mode, but this time with more to lose. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about my son, and the irony. The same man who had yelled, belittled, ignored, and neglected, now wanted equal rights, as if presence on paper erased absence in reality. But family court doesn't deal in emotions. It deals in evidence. So I had to prove what I had lived. We started compiling records. The hospital discharge notes, therapy logs, messages. He had sent the report. I filed after the night he tried to block us from leaving. None of it felt like enough. Because how do you prove emotional harm? How do you translate fear into a form the court will accept? I began to doubt myself. Was I exaggerating? Would the judge believe me? What if he cleaned up well, said all the right things, wore a suit and smiled just enough? And then one night I overheard my son talking to his cousin during a sleepover. They were playing superheroes. "I don't want to be the dad," he said. "Why not?" the cousin asked. "Because dads yell and slam doors and make moms cry." I froze in the hallway. That single sentence shattered every doubt I had. He remembered. He felt it. And if I didn't protect him now, he would grow up thinking that kind of man was normal, that kind of love was acceptable. So, I kept fighting. My lawyer warned me the case could drag, that he might use our past to question my judgment, that custody battles are rarely clean, but I was ready. I sat across from him at mediation, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. He looked polished, calm, smug even, like he thought I'd fold. "I just want to be part of his life," he said smoothly. "You had your chance," I replied. "You walked away from that hospital and blamed me for our loss. You screamed in front of him. You threatened me. That's not part of his life." "That's damage," the mediator tried to interject, but I didn't stop. "Do you remember his face that night?" I asked him. "Do you remember how he clung to me? How he shook when you slammed the door?" "Because I do." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he looked away. The outcome of mediation wasn't final, but the tide shifted. He agreed to supervised visitation. No overnights. No travel without written permission. It wasn't perfect. But it was a boundary. Afterward, he sent another email shorter than the last. "I didn't realize how much I hurt you. I still don't understand all of it, but I won't fight you anymore." I wanted to believe it was peace, but I knew better now. Sometimes people apologize just enough to ease their guilt, but not enough to change, so I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on rebuilding again, this time with more caution. I started attending a support group for single parents. I met women who had lived similar stories, different details, same pain. We shared advice, tears, and sometimes just quiet solidarity. I began journaling again, this time not about survival, but about growth. I wrote letters to my future self. I planned trips with my son. I started saving for our own place. Not my parents' spare room, but our space. A home built on safety, not secrets. And slowly, the fear began to fade again. Not because the world got safer, but because I got stronger. I learned how to say no, how to recognize manipulation, dressed as remorse, how to trust my gut and protect my peace without apology. And one afternoon, while we were grocery shopping, my son grabbed my hand and said, "Mom, I like us, just us. It took everything in me not to cry in the canned goods aisle. He didn't know what he had given me. In that moment, validation, hope, proof that I had made the right choice, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. And that's the thing about healing. It's not about avoiding pain. It's about walking through it and coming out with purpose. So when people ask me, "Now how did you do it?" I don't talk about lawyers or courtrooms or even therapy. I say this. I listened to my fear, but I followed my strength. Some endings don't come with fireworks or fanfare. Sometimes the most powerful ending is simply quiet. No shouting. No one slamming doors. Just a calm breath. A locked door. A moment where the air feels lighter, and you realize this is what peace sounds like. That's what life looks like for us now. It's been almost a year since I left. A year of paperwork therapy, late-night tears, early morning strength. A year of learning how to start over not with bitterness, but with intention. My son is thriving. He's sleeping through the night again. His laughter is louder now, unburdened. He's learning how to feel safe again. And so am I. We finally moved into our own place, a small 2-bedroom with light blue walls, and a tiny backyard where he digs for dinosaur bones. I let him name it. He calls it the Brave House. And honestly, that's exactly what it is. In this space, we make new memories. Not the kind we have to apologize for. Not the kind we have to forget. Just simple good ones. We dance in the kitchen again. We burn cookies and laugh about it. We have silly traditions like Pajama Tuesdays and Saturday movie night with popcorn that ends up everywhere. For a long time, I thought healing meant becoming who I was before, but that woman no longer exists. And that's okay, because this version of me, she's softer in the right places, stronger in the rest. She knows how to say no without guilt. She knows when to walk away. She understands that love should never feel like fear. Sometimes people ask if I still think about my ex-husband. I do, but not in the way I used to. I think of him the way you think of an old injury. A scar that once split you wide open but eventually closed. It still aches when the weather changes. It still reminds you to be careful, but it no longer defines how you move through the world. And I think that's the real victory. Not forgetting the pain, but learning how to live around it. How to grow in spite of it. How to turn it into something useful. If there's one thing this journey has taught me, it's this. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that suffers quietly. You are allowed to be whole, loudly, joyfully, unapologetically. You are allowed to leave, even if it shocks people. Even if you loved them. Even if they say it's selfish. Because self-preservation is not selfish. It's sacred. You are allowed to protect your peace like your life depends on it, because sometimes it does. And you are allowed to start again, no matter how long you stayed, no matter how broken you felt, no matter how many people told you that you were too much, or too sensitive, or overreacting. You are allowed to take up space in your own story. That's what I'm doing now. I'm no longer waiting for apologies that may never come. I'm not trying to fix what broke me. I'm not standing in rooms where I have to shrink to be loved. Instead, I'm standing in my own light. And maybe most importantly, I'm teaching my son to do the same. To speak up when something feels wrong. To say I'm scared without shame. To understand that love and fear should never come in the same sentence. To know that real strength isn't about how much you endure, but how boldly you choose to begin again. I still have days where the memories sting, days where grief creeps in uninvited, days where I wonder, what if things had been different? But then I look at the life we've built, not perfect, not easy, but ours. And I realize I didn't just survive. I became the woman who left when it was hardest. Who stayed gone when it would have been easier to return. Who rebuilt a home from ashes and filled it with laughter, safety, and love. So, no, I don't regret calling him a disgrace. Because that moment was the beginning of everything I have now. A quiet ending, a powerful rebirth, a life I am proud of. Did this story make you see a part of yourself? If it did, don't forget to leave a comment to share your thoughts, and most importantly, subscribe to Family Story, my husband, so you can hear more heartfelt family stories every week. Marriage isn't just a journey, it's a long story. And you are our companion on every page.